And people might just sneak in if they want.
Check. Hello, everyone. There will still be some people trickling in once we get started, but we're going to get started because we only have so much time today with Lucille, and we want to make sure we get as much out of her as we can. So Lucille is, are you still with STARS?
I am.
Yeah, STARS area ambulance nurse. And you were ICU before that, were you not?
I still work ICU.
Yeah.
I work 3 jobs.
3 jobs. So she's got something to teach us. So we're really glad to have you today, and she's going to speak, and there'll be time for questions as well.
Great. Oh, let me turn this on. Okay. Is it on? Yeah. Good. Awesome. Now, I know that we're being simulcasted in Calgary. Can everybody hear me there? I guess we can't ask them if they can hear us, right? So. All right, then we'll just start. Good. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to come and have a little chat with you today about accomplishing big goals. I just changed the front part of the presentation a little bit. It's kind of the first time that I present it, so bear with me if I stumble over a few things. Now, we are a fairly small group. I know people in Calgary won't be able to ask any questions, but if you have any questions as we're going along, just go ahead and shout them out or put up your hand or do whatever you need to do, grab my attention, and we'll get those answered. We have to be out of here by 10 to 1, so I'm going to try to get through this so that we have some time for questions at the end. All right, and people just kind of keep sneaking in. Should we dim the lights a little bit to see if that makes things a little bit better? I guess we won't know if people in Calgary can still see, but. Oh, okay, then we just won't. So this is a presentation about Everest, how I managed to accomplish this big goal that I had, and how you can also get it done in a just get it done style. So we're just going to start. This is Everest, and right at the top where you see the little plume of snow there, that's the summit of Everest, 8,848 meters, tallest mountain in the world. And there I was somewhere between 8 and 10 years old when I wrote down this goal. I actually wrote it down. This was a goal that I had. And I had that goal for 45 years. Well, I guess not 45 years because I was 45 when I actually accomplished it. But I had that goal for 35 years. And everybody was sort of asking me, well, number one, why did I have that goal? And I don't really have a good answer for that. I just know that that was something that I really wanted to do. I wrote my bucket list when I was in probably grade 5, made a whole list, and Everest was number 1. And hopefully after you see this and see all the beautiful pictures, you'll kind of understand a little bit more why that was my goal. So I'm just an ordinary person. I am a nurse. I fly with stars. But I do kind of all these ordinary things just like everybody else, and yet I was able to accomplish my big goal. So at the end of this presentation, we'll go through the 6 steps of what I did to accomplish the goals. And you can hopefully use those same techniques to accomplish your big goals as well. So we all have big goals, right? But we are all, law-abiding, tax-paying, responsible adults, right? And it's kind of difficult to kind of put those big goals into motion. So the first thing that I do is I leverage that amnesia. So I know when I was young and I had the goal of climbing Everest, I had no idea what it entailed. I had no idea what the cost was going to be. Had no idea that it was going to take 10 weeks of my life. I had no idea about all the training. I just thought this would be a really good goal. So I kind of encourage you to kind of, gather that amnesia and just, whatever your goal is, whether it's to run a race, whether it's to continue on with your schooling, you're not going to make those goals when you're kind of writing your final exam and things are kind of miserable and you're thinking, oh my goodness, what am I doing? That's not usually the time that you're setting the next goal. You're not setting the next goal, kind of in the final miles of your marathon that you're running. You're just thinking, I just want to get through this and I'm never going to do it again. So I try to set these goals when I'm sitting at home, I'm comfortable, I've eaten, my legs aren't hurting, I'm nice and warm, and that's when I kind of think, oh, okay, well, what's the next goal going to be? So leverage that amnesia. The second one is to commit publicly. So if you kind of keep it all inside and don't tell anyone what your big goals are, then it's easy to just kind of say, oh, well, maybe I'm just not going to do that. But if you shout it from the rooftops, tell everyone, tell all your peers, they're going to hold you accountable. And so when I finally decided that I was going to climb Everest, I told everybody. So not only would they hold me accountable, but I also found all these different people that kind of came out of the woodwork that were being supportive. My family, of course, was supportive, but they didn't really know how to be supportive. So I found some other mountaineers, people that just kind of helped me do kind of some different things. And I just got all the support. So when you've got these big goals, tell everybody about it. Number 3, and this is really important, make a costly investment in your goal. So once you've paid for that race, you've paid for that schooling, you've paid for that trip, you've paid for, a $700 tent so that you can go camping in this remote area that you've been wanting to do, then you've got that momentum going already in the right direction. So spend that money, put that down payment, make that payment, make that costly investment, and that's kind of the next step. And then number 4 is to lock the exit doors. So you don't have the opportunity to kind of back out. And this is where you need to do the time. This is where you need to do the work, put in all that effort, all that energy. And this is where I started doing some of my training. And this is by Muhammad Ali. I hated every minute of training, but I said, don't quit, suffer now, and live the rest of your life as a champion. So that's what he was thinking, and I thought, all right, so I've made my goal, I've leveraged my amnesia. Boy, I'm going to have to change that slide, I think. I've committed publicly. I made that down payment. I made that payment that I was going to be going to Everest. I bought the plane tickets, and I thought, okay, I've got to be training. So I was already fairly fit when I started this, but I really needed to augment. So I started running, I was cycling, and then what I did was I built sort of a little kumbu in the backyard. So I have a huge fear of falling. So we set this up, and every day I would just walk back and forth on this ladder. And you'll see a little bit later why it's so important to be able to walk on these ladders. So I started just walking with my boots. Then I put on a boots and backpack, and then boots and backpack and crampons. And I would just go back and forth every day. And then the next thing that I did was I started doing a little bit more ice climbing. And everything was going well. And then I thought, really, am I doing enough? And so that comes to the 5th point, where it says it's going to get hard, and you need to ignore it, and you need to move on. And this is where I decided I need to really augment the amount of training that I do. So I read this quote, and it says, the goal of training for the mountains is to make yourself as difficult to kill as possible. And I read that quote. I was probably still about a year and a half out from actually climbing Everest. And I read that, and I thought, all right, I really need to step it up. So what I started doing was I went to the TELUS Tower, and I chose the TELUS Tower because my husband worked at TELUS at the time. So I would get there usually after a night shift. So I'd work a 12-hour night shift at the hospital. I would cycle out to TELUS. I would put on a backpack. I would keep barbells, so some weights in my husband's cubicle. I put 25 pounds in there, and I would just start walking the stairs, and I'd take the high-speed elevator down, and then I would kind of keep doing that. So I started off with doing 3 sets of 33 floors, 662 steps with 25 pounds. And then I was talking to my climbing partner, and he says, yeah, that's great. He says, why don't you increase it to 30 pounds, 40 pounds, 45 pounds, increase your time as well. So what I did just before I left for Everest was that I was in that stairwell, 45 pounds, and it's actual dumbbells of 45 pounds. So I knew exactly how much I was weighing. And I was in there for 8 hours. 8 hours just going up and back down. And when the going gets tough, what I was just sort of thinking was, okay, I'm just going to imagine these are kind of my last steps to the summit. The going is getting hard, but I'm just going to ignore it, and I'm just going to keep on going. And then this last point is, so this is Logan. So that was some of the other things that I did was I climbed a couple of other mountains. So I climbed Aconcagua, which is the tallest peak in South America, at about 7,000 meters. So almost 2,000 meters less than Everest, but I wanted to see how I would do with the cold and the altitude and that sort of thing. And then I went to do Logan. So this is Logan, the tallest peak in Canada, the most beautiful peak that I've ever summited. The reason for climbing Logan was so that I could spend 18 days on the mountain and just see how I would be able to kind of do with the, the suffering, the cold, the, kind of all that stuff. And then step 6 is important as well. It says, think about the future you. And this is sort of like the visualization. So everyone has heard about visualization, but usually when you're doing the visualization, it's not when you're kind of in the thick of things. You're doing the visualization of you kind of getting across the finish line, crossing across the stage and, receiving your diploma, your degree, your PhD, whatever it is, or climbing the last steps. But actually more important is when you're actually in the thick of things and it's getting really difficult. And this is when you're thinking, am I going to keep going or am I going to turn around? And on every mountain that I've climbed, everything that I've done, and probably every one of the goals that you're going to be trying to accomplish, you're going to come to that time where you're going to think, am I going to quit or am I going to keep going? I've come up against a hurdle. And so what you need to think is the future you. So I always think, okay, so what am I going to say when I'm back in Canada and I'm back with all my buddies, all my friends, and we're sitting over a beer and they're going to say, oh, all right, so how was Everest? And I say, well, it was cold, and it was so hard, and you come up with some lame excuse as to why you turned around, right? So when you're kind of in the thick of things, you really want to think, okay, so I'm going to come back and I'm going to say, I climbed it. I finished it. I, finished that race. I, finished my degree, whatever it is, you want to think about that and just visualize that, yes, you have accomplished that goal. So those are the 6 steps that I went through. And hopefully that you'll be able to use them as well. Now, there is a bit of a disclaimer. A good part of you that are here are quite young. You feel invincible. I felt invincible until I was about 50. So I do understand about that. If you do not put the time and the effort, which is one of the more important steps, you need to follow all these 6 steps, right, to be able to accomplish your goals, however way you kind of want to look at it. But if you don't put the time and the effort, you may end up not accomplishing that goal, or you may end up not coming back, right? And that's really not accomplishing your goal if you're not coming back, especially from Everest. So that's a bit of a disclaimer. That's for everyone who feels invincible. So flying out to Kathmandu, it's just above India, and my little pointer isn't working, but this is where it's at. So Kathmandu is in Nepal. We flew out there. And the nice thing about climbing mountains all over the world is you get to experience all these different cultures, see all these different cities, meet all these wonderful people. So this is what Kathmandu is like, and it's really quite wonderful. And these are the prayer wheels. And so as you go around, you think of somebody that you want to send prayers off into the universe for, and as you spin it, it sends prayers off into the universe, which is really kind of a wonderful thing. And then we went to a monastery where they did some chanting. Behind all those little cubby holes are books. Some of those books are as old as 400 years old and have come directly from Tibet. All these books get chanted once a year. It takes 60 monks 1 week to get them all chanted. And so you can see there were the 3 monks that were sitting there, and they're all chanting from a different book. And it's really kind of lulls you, and it's just a very peaceful time watching that. So that was our time in Kathmandu. And then what we did was we flew into Lukla, and this was to save us about a week of hiking in. So from Lukla, so Kathmandu is over here, Lukla is here, and then up to Everest. So getting up to Everest, it's only about 50 or 60 kilometers. You're gaining a fair bit of elevation. You take 8 days to do that, and that's to give your body time to acclimatize to the higher elevation where there's less oxygen. And this is what it's like hiking in, and everybody hikes in. There are no vehicles there. It's all the paths are built on the side of the mountains. And this is what it looks like. They grow their own food. So this isn't pasture land. This was actually land that they would be growing their potatoes, growing their barley, growing that sort of thing so that they can eat. And of course, all the goods are brought in on the backs of men, women, and also on the backs of yaks. And so some of the men are carrying up to 90 kilos. They're carrying, those big gallon jugs of fuel. So it's certainly a different way of living. I think some areas are just now starting to have power, but there's about a 250-kilometer area where they rely solely on solar power for any of their electronics that they have. And they do have cell phones, and they are starting to have some cell phone towers kind of along the way. Most larger areas, so I can't really even call them towns, will even have computers that we can go in and try to upload pictures so that we can send them to our families when we're back home. And this is just what it's like hiking in for those 8 days. And the people that we saw. Yeah. So this is my friend Dawa. Dawa had joined the team back in 1986, the first Canadians that had tried to summit Everest without oxygen, and he was on that team. The guide that I was with and another gentleman that I know Dawa very well because they were on that team together. And so I was quite privileged to go and see Dawa at his tea house that he had just built. And I always look at this and I'm always so amazed. And you see how straight that corner is. All those rocks are, where they live, it's all mountainous, it's all rocks. They just gather those rocks, kind of put them all together, and these are hand chipped. So they're just out with a hammer and a chisel and hand chipped and then placed there. And look how perfect it is. Just that workmanship. I don't know how many hours it's taken, but that's what and all the buildings there are like that. It's really amazing. So this is the inside of his house, and this is Dawa's wife. And so I usually make this presentation to like grade 3s, grade 4s, and I kind of explain to them, this is where they live. All their everything that is cooked on that stove. They happen to have a little bit of wood, but usually it's the dung that gets dried out. There's usually a fair bit of straw in there, and that's what they're burning to add that and fuel when they're cooking their rice and that sort of thing. And this is solar power, so a really nice way to be boiling your water. It's a pretty big contraption for one little pot of water, but it certainly works well. So as we're hiking along, this was probably day 5, we stopped in to see Lama Geshe. Lama Geshe did a puja ceremony for us, and he is very well known. Everyone goes for a puja ceremony before they go to Everest, and it's just a cleansing ceremony. And I was expecting it to be quite formal, actually. So we walked in there, and everybody's kind of chit-chatting and visiting, and then we're poured some sweet tea, which is really nice, and some biscuits were passed around, and the whole time Lama Geshe is doing the chanting. And then one by one, we handed him that kata. So that kata is that scarf that's there. You put some money inside the kata, always in an odd denomination. You hand it to him. He takes the money out, and then he puts the kata around you. The other thing that he did was he put a sunji cord around us. So that's that red cord that's there. He has tied a special knot in the middle, and he was saying a prayer while he tied that knot. And then he puts it around our neck, and it's always there to protect us. And the legend goes that it's there for as long as you need the protection. And when you no longer need the protection, it falls off. And I remember being at the ceremony sort of wondering, I wonder when it's going to fall off, right? And so after I had climbed Everest, we came back to Canada. I had made plans that we were going to go and climb Choyoyu, which is the 6th highest peak in the world. So we were going to do that fall, and we were making these plans. And then, I finally realized things just weren't going in the direction that they were supposed to be going into. And then I finally decided, all right, I'm not going to climb Choyoyu this fall. And the minute that I said those words, I reached up, because I was always reaching up and playing with it, and it was gone. So I no longer needed the protection because I was not going to go climb another big mountain right away. Didn't need the protection. It had fallen off. So I did find it a couple days later, and so I have it framed in our house right now. But that's the puja ceremony that we had. And then we walk out of this puja ceremony, and we look out at this little monument that they've built. And on it are engraved the names of mostly men, but some women as well, that have died on Everest. And I remember looking at that, pausing a bit and continuing on. And then we kept on going. So now we are probably 2 days away from Everest. And I knew that this was going to be there. This is a chorten. A chorten is a burial place. It usually carries the ashes of the person that it was built for. This was Scott Fisher. Scott Fisher was a guide. He had summited Everest many times, had summited mountains all over the world. He was a tall man, a strong man, capable, knowledgeable man. And yet here was this chorten. And I remember looking at it and thinking, what am I going to do? And then you look around, and there are probably 30 chortens in this area. And they're all burial places for people who have died on Everest. And I had joined a team. We were a team of 18. I took off my backpack, sat down, had a little cry, because that's what I do, and really thought about it and thought, am I going to keep on going, or am I going to turn around and go back? And after about 30 minutes, my teammates looking at me, not kind of puzzled. But after about 30 minutes, I decided I have done all the training, all the preparation, everything that I needed to do. I was ready. I was determined. And so I picked up my backpack, turned my back, and continued on to base camp. So I get to base camp, and base camp is a crazy place. There are probably 1,000 people that are there, and probably 1,000 tents that are there. There are some, each team kind of has a communal tent where we're eating. Every person has their own tent so that we can hopefully get enough sleep that we need. You're on a glacier, and I knew that we were going to be sleeping on a glacier, and I had visited base camp before, but I had never slept there. So what happens during the day is the ambient temperature is somewhere between 25 and 30. Just the rays of the sun are just warming everything up. So what happens is that glacier starts to melt, and you can hear the water rushing underneath your tent. So it's kind of built up with some rocks, but you can hear that water rushing underneath your tent. At night, when it gets to minus 25, minus 30, which is the actual temperature there, everything is hardening up. So now you can hear the glacier actually moving and cracking and making all these sounds. You had to kind of keep shoring up your tent every couple of days because the water was just eroding everything underneath it. So that's what base camp was like. It really was quite spectacular. So this was our tent, and these were all the solar panels that we had. So if people would charge up their satellite phones. Most of us had a satellite phone so that we could communicate back home. I had a blog, so I would phone in a report, and then my husband would type it up and post it on my blog. I had some school groups that were following me. So apart from charging up, kind of the necessary batteries, For our evening entertainment, we had a small DVD player, and if we had enough sun during the day, we could actually watch a whole movie. So 18 of us, we'd all have to agree on what movie we were watching, and that was our entertainment for the night. And then there was an Everest ER. So this, being a nurse, this was quite interesting to me. There are physicians that come from all over the world, very accomplished mountaineers and very accomplished physicians that are going there and volunteering their time. As Westerners, we all paid to have access to this Everest ER, but all the Sherpas and all the locals had free access and free treatments and free medications, anything that they needed, which is really quite wonderful. And this is what it looked like on the inside. They actually had all the equipment that I have, for the most part, in the intensive care unit or in the STARS ambulance where I work. So it's pretty amazing. Who funds that? So all the Westerners that are there climbing, we all pay money into that to pay for everything to be brought over, all the monitors, all the equipment, all the... So you're absolutely, yes. Yeah. So, and worth it. Yes. So then we had a second puja ceremony before we started climbing. So this was our altar that was there. Everyone kind of put whatever was important to them. You can notice a few cans of beer that are in the front, because that's important as well, right? You need a little bit of downtime. All our climbing gear. And then these were, the one on the end is actually a lama, and then the other two were actually our climbing guides that were there. And so they did some chanting from those same books. And then they had these little things that were carved out of butter, actually. And so what happens is they carve them out of butter, and as the sun warms them up, they kind of melt and deform and then kind of go away. And that's to show that nothing is really permanent. And then what they did was they put up the prayer flags, just like the prayer flags that we have here. And then you throw rice, and rice is for new life. And so after that puja ceremony was done, so now we have been in base camp for about 3 days. Now it's time to start climbing. So if you're climbing on the south side, you have to climb through the icefall first. And I had seen the icefall before, so I had been there 2 years prior. I had seen the icefall, and I looked at it, and I thought, it doesn't look that bad, right? It doesn't look that bad. You kind of look at it, you know it's 700 meters high. What's happening with that glacier is it's coming down the front face, and so it's moving at a rate of about 3 feet per day, which doesn't sound like a lot, but what it does is it forms these big crevasses, so those big open areas, which were spanned by those aluminum ladders, which is why I was doing all that training on the aluminum ladders. And the other thing that it does is it forms those big seracs. So those big seracs are those big blocks of ice. And those kind of come tumbling down. So some of those blocks of ice were the size of a vehicle. Some of them were the size of a house. And there was actually one that was the size of an apartment building. And that actually came down about 3 years ago, just right after the avalanche that was there. So this is kind of a blown up picture, and it's a little hard to see, but you can see that there's a person just kind of there. So this is taken from a little bit further away, and you can still see that person in there. And you can see, you know, a little bit better kind of those big blocks of ice and kind of those big open crevasses that are there. And so that person is still in there, and I always have trouble finding him, but he's kind of, he's right here. And so if you pay attention to those big rocks that are there, these are the same rocks that I was just looking at. So that gives you a bit better of an appreciation of, you know, what the icefall is actually like. So these are the Sherpas that are going up through the icefall. The Sherpas are integral to most people summiting Everest. They are doing load carries every day, carrying oxygen bottles, carrying tents, carrying food up to the higher camps for us. And this is what it looks like in there. And those big ladders. And crossing those ladders. There were 30 ladder crossings the year that I went, and it's all maintained by the Sherpa doctors. the icefall doctors, and they just kind of look after everything. Yeah, it wasn't easy. I don't know what he was thinking. So you can see those ladders down at the bottom, crossing that, going up and down.
What happens if you go down?
You don't survive. Yeah, yeah. But you notice those ropes on the side. You're supposed to clip into those ropes and hang onto it as you're walking across. You'll notice that Donald, who's doing the photography, didn't actually hang onto that rope. He just went across. There was, after my fourth time through, I was not holding onto a rope, and I did slip and fall, and I did have someone grab me and bring me back to safety, so that was pretty lucky on my part. So that's what it's like going through the icefall. I went through the icefall 5 times up, 5 times down, and it seemed like every time I would call my husband, he said, you know, you're always at base camp resting. So what happens is you get to base camp, and usually by the time I get to base camp, I have trouble acclimatizing at about the 5,000 meter mark. So I get to base camp, I can't eat or drink, you're just nauseated, you have an intense headache, you really can't do anything, can't move. It takes me usually about 3 or 4 days, and then after that I'm kind of good to go. So then you start at base camp after your days of rest, you go up through the icefall and then come back down in that same day, and then you rest at base camp for 2 or 3 days, and then you go from base camp up to Camp 1. You might spend the night at Camp 1, and then you come back down to base camp, rest for a couple more days, and then you just go further and further. Most people don't go past Camp 3, and there are 4 camps on there. And the camps are really just locations. People have asked me, you know, if there are buildings there and that sort of thing. There is nothing up there. There are tents that are brought up, and really that's it. So the reason, the way that you acclimatize is going up, spending some time and then coming back down. Your body gets used to less oxygen, builds up those red blood cells that you have in your body that helps transport the oxygen. And by building that up, then you can be able to function with less oxygen. So that's the reason why we're always kind of up and down, and why I went up and down 5 times. So this is Camp 1, really quite a pretty area. We did our own cooking and melting of the snow for water to drink, and that sort of thing. And this is what it looks like with your little stove kind of just outside the tent. And sometimes we have it inside the tent, of course, with a lot of ventilation. And this is the Western Coombe, and I remember when I saw it for the first time, I just sat down and cried, because that's what I do, I sit down and cry. But I was just so overcome with emotion. I had been wanting this for so long. Got up there, and it was so hot, but it was so beautiful. It was really quite fantastic. So once you get up to Camp 1 and get up into the Western Coombe, now you head off to Camp 2. In Camp 2, there isn't a lot of elevation gain. And you can just sort of see it kind of out here, kind of in this area here. So not a lot of elevation gain, and I thought, you know, it's not too far away. It'll probably take me, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. But your distances are really distorted because everything is so huge over there. And so I remember just putting my head down and walking and trudging for an hour and looking up, and it didn't look like I was any closer to Camp 2. So it actually ended up taking me 4 hours to get to Camp 2. The first time that I went there, which was really difficult. So we get to Camp 2, and this is what was stored in our big dining tent. We had a large dining tent for the whole team. every team member had 5 tanks of oxygen allocated to them. So these are brought up by the Sherpas up to Camp 2, and then they are brought up to Camp 4, which is where we're going to start using them. We sort of start from Camp 3, but we usually bring that one up ourselves. And then there's usually a stockpile at Camp 4. And then from there, we carry whatever we need for when we're going for the summit. So somebody asked me how much did it cost. Each tank of oxygen was $500. But that was not just for the tank, that was to have it actually located up at Camp 4 for where I needed it. So well worth the money, absolutely. This is what it looked like at Camp 2. So things are a little bit more rustic up here. We had some nice chairs, like camp chairs that were down at base camp. So now we're sitting on some rocks. So these are some rocks that we're sitting on, and there's actually just a little piece of foam kind of just over top. So that's what it looked like. And these are the Sherpa men that were on my team. And this is where our cooks did all the cooking, which was great. And so my story deviates a little bit. So I started off with a team of 18. I had a climbing partner who is a fellow nurse and a peer, also works at STARS with me. And he was going to climb Everest at the same time. He decided not to join a team. He just hired a personal Sherpa and went independent. And so what happened was we saw a short weather window in early May. So Everest is usually climbed somewhere in the middle of May. And the reason for that is that the jet stream sits right over the summit of Everest. Jet stream is winds of somewhere between 150 to 200 kilometers an hour, and it's going to be brutally cold. So as the monsoon comes in the middle of May, it pushes that off for a short period of time. It used to push it off for a period of 2 weeks where you could summit at any point in time. And nowadays, because of climate change or whatever is going on in the world, it moves off for a couple days, it comes back for maybe a week or 10 days, and then moves off for a few more days, and then kind of comes back. So you really need to harness those short weather windows. So we saw a short weather window in early May. I obtained permission from my guide to actually leave the team, and I went climbing with my climbing partner. So I had a Sherpa, he had a Sherpa, and then so really just the 4 of us. So when I got up to Camp 2, I was there by myself because the rest of my teammates were down at base camp. And so I got up there and they fed me this wonderful meal. And I looked around and I was eating it, and I looked around and nobody else was eating. And I realized what was going on. They washed my plate, and once I was done eating, they washed my plate, put everything away, then the cooks started cooking for all the men that were there. And so I spent 2 nights at Camp 2 when we were on our summit push. And so I went up to the cook and I said, okay, you don't need to cook anything special for me. I will eat whatever the boys are eating, and I will eat when they are eating as well. And so therefore not wasting all that fuel and wasting all that other energy and stuff. And so that's what he did, but he always made something a little special for me, which is always really nice. So that was 2 days up there, and then we started going up to Camp 3. So it's sort of a little bit difficult to see, but you can sort of see that there's sort of a bit of a line that's kind of going up past Camp 3. So this is kind of Camp 3 up in here, and going up to the Geneva Spur kind of over to the side there. And that's called the Lhotse Face. The Lhotse is actually the 4th highest peak in the world, and it is steep, and it is icy, and it's difficult. So we had to get over this Bergschrung, which is just kind of a bit of a hollow area, and then we were climbing up the Lhotse Face. This is icy and really difficult and really challenging. And this is where I'm wearing my boots, my crampons, and as you can see, they are fairly sharp. And even at that, what I had to do was I had to kick at the ice usually 3 times before the crampon would actually stick. And then I'd move my Jumar up the rope and then do that again. And I did that for 6 hours until we got up to Camp 3. So a lot of work and effort to get up there, not just a simple little walk. So this is us going up to Camp 3, and you can just sort of see the tents up there. And the tents are kind of dug out. They've kind of dug out the platform so that we have a flat place to sleep. But you certainly don't want to be doing any sleepwalking, especially without your crampons on, because you're just going to be falling down that slope, probably 3,000 or 4,000 meters. So once I got up to Camp 3, I was there by myself with my Sherpa. So this is Searing. We were just up there, just the two of us. We got up there, we got some ice so that we could melt it to make some drinking water and to make a little bit of soup. My climbing partner, Donal, was down at Camp 2, and he was planning on going from Camp 2, and we were going to be meeting somewhere between Camp 3 and Camp 4, and then just kind of climbing up together. So we were there by ourselves. And this is what it looked like the night before we went for the summit, and it was beautiful. It was spectacular. And I remember chatting with my climbing partner who was down at Camp 2, and he said, "How are things going?" And I said, "It is beautiful here." 5 minutes left? Okay, then we're just gonna kind of keep going. So this is us kind of climbing. And I was just me chatting with my guide down at base camp. And this is us climbing. This is what we look like. And then this is just how slowly we're walking. And it was beautiful. You'll notice I don't even have mitts on. So it was a really nice day. I'm always blessed with having beautiful days when I'm out. So this is Camp 4, very desolate place. You can sort of see the tanks of oxygen that are up there. Just a couple of tents that are there because there are only 4 of us that are going for the summit. Usually, there's usually 150 people that are going for the summit on any day that it's summitable, and we were really blessed. There were just the 4 of us because we were early. So this is us kind of contemplating the few hours before we went for the summit. And this is sort of the route that we took. That's the south summit, and then the true summit is actually 2 hours further than that. So I'll just take a second to load this up. There we go. So this is us just going for the summit. So that's the summit ridge. We're still about 20 minutes away. We left Camp 4 at about 7 o'clock at night. Got to the summit about 6 o'clock in the morning. It was a long night. It was a difficult night. It was a cold night. We got up to the balcony. Donal asked me, "How are things going?" And I said, "I'm done. I'm done. My legs are done. I can't go any further." And he said, "Oh, okay." He kept on going, and so did I. We realized that the steps, they were kind of kicking steps in, and they were just a little bit too big for me. So once they straightened that out, that was a lot easier. But as we're climbing through the night, and we're climbing the summit ridge, and we're looking over into Tibet, and it's dark, and I don't know if you remember seeing those clouds that were down below us. There was a big thunderstorm that night in Tibet. And it's really quite spectacular. As the lightning would strike, it would light up the clouds and then light up the sky. And every time that I saw that, I went, wow, because you're so hypoxic up there. So yeah, so life is not measured by the number of breaths you take, but by the moments that take your breath away. So this is the video of the summit.
Can you guys please help me thank Lucille for coming in today and speaking to us? We have several events next week, so please check them out. We've got crowdfunding, we've got how to build a business plan, and